Are you already registered?
Dear viewers, I warmly welcome you to today's show Visite, and I would like to thank you again for all the numerous entries on Visite at QS24.tv. In this show, however, I would like to continue with the big topic of our immune system. Today, I would like to follow up on the fact of how our immune system can and is actually overwhelmed and how it is also weakened by overweight. Overweight, having too much weight on your hips, is of course very relative. Today, we know that people do well when they have a healthy weight of well-being and follow this up. A healthy weight of well-being does not always move within the framework of what we call overweight. Today, we statistically calculate the so-called body mass index. We take two dimensions. One is the current body weight and the other is the body size. It makes a bit of sense to know that, if this is not in a certain equilibrium, a much too high load is created on the other side, and this on different levels. This body mass index is calculated from the weight. Let's say we weigh 90 kilograms. This is then divided by the body size, for example 1.85 meters. This results in a body mass index of 25.3. 25.3 is a measure where we say today that the normality is 18 to 24. This means that it would be above that, but in a time span of 35 to 44 you are again in between. This means that the so-called body mass index can very well be determined according to one's age. If you go very high, but also very low, underweight, then these are processes that have a reflector effect on our immune system. A body mass index, for example, at 60 kilograms, 1.67 meters tall, at 21 kilograms, is an ideal weight. But look at a certain well-being weight yourself. Overweight would really mean that the body mass index goes far beyond 25 to 30. We live in a really civilized society. We haven't had to suffer hunger for an hour in these generations that live in this world. Unless there are still some survivors from the time of the World War. Otherwise, we are challenged with what we worry about every day, our physical well-being, to act consciously. Especially the question of overweightness creates processes that have a reflector effect on our immune system. I would now like to turn to a fact, and that is the question of sugar and fructose. There have been enough programs on this topic that we appeal today to a carbohydrate-reduced diet. Because people, especially in Western Europe and America, take an excess of carbohydrates every day. But this sugar that appears in the blood, whether from chocolate, pasta, sweets, biscuits, bonbons, pralines, over bread, noodles, rice, potatoes, so starch products, everything appears in the blood as glucose. And this sugar, of course, has to be metabolized. It has to go where substances change, where glucose is actually needed. And glucose is the fast energy supplier. To do a job that takes up a lot of my energy, I sometimes need a boost of fast energy. That means, when I'm in a very, let's say, stressful desk job, but also when I'm very physically stressed, when I'm on a big hike, when I'm traveling many kilometers, when I'm working hard on the field like I used to, I need carbohydrates, I need strength, and it has to be available to me quickly. I need sugar for that. And this sugar, of course, makes the blood sugar rise very quickly and costs insulin. And this insulin creates the pancreas. And if I take a lot of sugar with me, I need a lot of insulin, and the sugar can be absorbed. But it's also like a locomotive that simply picks up the sugar and immediately gets on the way to transport the sugar to the many cells that are now calling for it, within the framework of a physical or also mentally strong activity. But what I think is completely overwhelming for all of us in this direction is that the relationship is no longer right. The balance is no longer there. The excess of what I intake every day, and then all of you just go to court with yourself. Where does sugar have its priority in your own life? But the other thing that is very close to my heart at the moment is to use a few words about fructose. Because fructose is the fruit sugar, and that sounds really good. And that's good, too, because fructose is the fruit. These fruits that we eat, we're supposed to eat 3, 4, 5 hands full of fruit a day. And I say that vegetables should also be placed in good proportion. We should do that every day. And we must not forget that, of course, this fructose is used in a completely different way than pure glucose. That means that fructose doesn't need insulin. It is insulin independent. But if we take too much of it with us, it gets into the liver. And the liver, which is not at all able to need all this sugar, converts it into fat. So a so-called fatty liver is not fat-dependent. Instead, we say to these cells that appear to us in the ultrasound, because they take on a completely different color than the normal liver, we call them fatty cells, but they are actually connective tissue cells. These are cells that sit between the healthy cells and which are not available for the liver to function. These are connective tissue cells. That means that if the liver has to create space and thus destroys healthy cells, this is an even more unfavorable balance for my organism. And if we say today that I can eat 3, 4, 5 hands full of fruit, and we would leave it at that, even with a good sports activity, with a really conscious diet, then that would be really good. The problem is only that fructose occurs in fruit, vegetables, and also in honey, but that it has a much higher degree of sweetness than pure white sugar or brown sugar. And that's why it is produced in a highly concentrated industrial way. And that's the problem. That's the problem. And please don't hate on eating the good fruits. But don't eat only fruit from morning to evening. And don't eat too much sweet fruit, but eat seasonal fruit. And that's really good and enough. But the purely produced industrial fructose, it sets mechanisms in motion, which of course significantly contribute to pulling the balance out of the levers. And by that I mean all sweet drinks. Iced tea. My God, I still wonder how many people drink cola. These are sweets like bars, chewing gums, bonbons, jams, sweetened breadcrumbs, syrups, sauces. All finished sauces have fructose. Bagged soups. Who buys a bagged soup here? In a bagged soup. Nor chicken broth. That's 2 grams of dried chicken. The rest is from the lab. Enjoy your meal. Ketchup. Dairy products. Some dairy products. Look at it. Yogurts have fructose in them. Also mueslis. So I just want to say that on the one hand it is also a flavor enhancer. But fruit sugar or even fructose syrup, corn syrup, cane sugar, it's all fruit sugar. And that does something to us. Because this excess of sugar is not only used in the liver by the body, but also in fat cells. And the main problem in the context of this excess weight is actually the belly fat. And this belly fat is of course a bit of the main problem. Because the belly fat stimulates the development of fat cells. They are very quickly 20 times larger than the normal cell. They can really grow. And as part of the growth, they are really small, almost like, how should I call it, like inflammatory bombs that produce their own hormones. That's aponectin. Aponectin consists of over 200 different proteins, amino acids. And when they are produced again and again, then they set up an immune cascade involuntarily in motion, which now activates inflammatory processes, i.e. inflammation processes. Stimulate the macrophages, stimulate the T cells. We say stimulate the tumor necrosis factor. That means a chronically inflammatory event is triggered with the emergence of a so-called insulin resistance. Please remember this word insulin resistance, because insulin resistance is actually the whole topic if I don't have an autoimmune diabetes. Autoimmune diabetes is the one that already occurs very early in children or adolescents. But an insulin resistance I create myself. I don't want to say that every person should be aware of this. This is why this channel is so incredibly big, because it conveys awareness, knowledge, that I understand things and can make conscious decisions. Do I just buy this iced tea, or maybe I'll have another cup of tea in the evening? I think these are all things that are very, very valuable. And in the context of these inflammatory processes, where insulin receptors break down on the cell, the actual sugar that wants to come now as a fast energy supplier will no longer work. And that's how they leverage the immune system. That's how they leverage energetic, aggressive effects on the energy function, the mitochondrial function of the cells. And it's a cascade of cellular, but also immunological processes that are mislead. And now just the question of stress. This was also discussed in one of the programs. Over a long time, increased stress hormones. And you all know what happens when I produce too much cortisol. Then I get obesity. And that's a truncal obesity. If you take high doses of cortisol, you get such a swollen face. That's not meant to be bad, but in medical terms we're talking about a moon face, where everything is so round and plump. And then the truncal obesity, especially these problem zones in the stomach, butt, hips, hands, arms, legs. It all stays thin. That's accumulation that then also quietly maneuvers me into a so-called metabolic syndrome. Fat metabolism is leveraged, blood pressure rises. And, of course, due to insulin resistance, there is also a, let's say, misdirection of my carbohydrate metabolism. These are things that are never worth it, to really go all the way. At this point, on the other hand, I don't want to forget that there is also an overweight. Which many, or not many, but some people have. Namely a so-called lipodema. That means that the lymph flow, which runs parallel to the entire vessel system and drives the lymph, the venous blood. It's a self-contained cycle. When a stagnation occurs here, then the tissue is penetrated, heavily burdened, and the legs swell. The body feels like it's being pumped out. And the lymph system, which, within the framework of our defense system, has an immensely great importance. Because all these immune cells via the lymph system then also reach the lymph nodes. The whole defense is called off, reproduced, antibodies are produced. If this lymph system no longer regulates, then, of course, these defensive battles that take place in the lymph nodes, we call it the lymph package in the intestine, they can no longer be regulated as collection points. Sometimes this lipodema is recognized pretty late. It's a tissue multiplication in a dramatic way, which is really necessary from the body in a compensatory way. So that the psyche is really heavily burdened. Because these are also pains, these are also heavy, these are also metabolic processes, the skin is so tight, so tense, I don't always have that, or I don't have that when I'm overweight. The psyche is probably burdened from a certain point on, without question, because life is getting more and more difficult. But a lipodema has a really high clinical background. And if the lymphs alone could no longer run down the legs, then that would be, I don't want to say a death blow, but that's things, life has to be in motion. Just think about it, if we don't have any more waste disposal in a city, if we don't have any more sanitary facilities in a city, people would all have to go outside and look for any possibility to get rid of their excrements. That would cause chaos within a short time, and everything in our body is interwoven. That's why, of course, with such a lipodema, I really have to recognize that early on and counter-regulate it dramatically, continuously. Also mechanically, through movement and all these things. The stimulation, I'll come back to our immune system in the context of overweight, and also the slowing down, really slowing down the activity of our natural killer cells, which we know today, and there is an incredibly broad study that also presents the situation, the natural killer cells have consequences. The natural killer cells are responsible for our tumor defense. They are also responsible for our viral reactivations. And if we weaken this defense too much, then we have to explain the susceptibility to people who are heavily overweight. And we have to do such stimulation tests. We also have to resort to the activity of such natural killer cells. Overweight in the form of daily food, and every pound goes through the mouth, of course, and of course also with the root of the plant, the human being, and that is the intestine. That means here, where the food has to be split up into real nutrients and vital substances, here, where the only barrier to the mucous membranes is, what can go in there, what has to come out, poison, pollutants. Diseases actually have to come out. They can go through there, but they have to leave the body. Billions of microorganisms, that is, a handful of Earth has much more billions of microorganisms than humans on Earth, but you can imagine it so analogously in the intestine. These microorganisms, which in their, I would say, task in us, and I would wish, if this mindfulness for this microcosm in us also slowly reaches you, that we thus support our healthy, good, wonderful microorganisms. To regulate the metabolism. To keep the immunity in balance, because 80% of the immune cells sit on the intestinal mucosa, on the border areas between the outside and the inside, to stabilize our psyche and, of course, to pass metabolism products, like the gall toxin, to bind it, to eliminate it. But an intestinal imbalance on this level can also cause overweight. Can cause depression, can disturb the whole fat digestion. And life is always an ambivalence, it is always 24 hours of giving and taking, and believe me, there is someone who knows exactly in what condition something has to be preserved, and that is our body all by itself. And if I may go back to the whole story of sugar, we rob it of the B vitamins, we rob it of the high number of highly effective, valuable microorganisms, because we open the door for the fungicide. Millions of new yeast colonies develop when I keep staying on the sugar. It is only possible that other microorganisms have to die. That it is a matter of space. They compete for their places, but a healthy defense is no longer available and this mucous membrane barrier simply begins to open up here. That is why it is so important to take care of it, to regulate the intestine well every day, to have a colonitotherapy. To have a coffee enema, or other enemas, and if he blocks, then support that, to take food with you, the so-called prebiotics. Prebiotics only mean that I make sure that my microbial world, which prevails in me, can actually do very well. What enables me to have an optimal digestion? What enables me to have an optimal excretion of toxins? What enables me to combine microorganisms all by myself? For example, if I have a very nice, milk-sour environment, there are enough lactobacillus, bifidus bacteria, which make up 80% of the entire microflora, or Bacillus subtilis as the strongest regulator here in the environment. This can be wonderfully balanced by such a prebiotic. The defense is stimulated, cholesterol is well regulated, minerals are now better built up, folic acid and other vitamins are better absorbed. Stomach cancer cannot develop if the mucous membrane is intact. It's an immune organ. Don't underestimate that. Prevention with children, asthma, or eczema, if the intestine is in a very nice balance. But you shouldn't expect that if you give them biscuits or cookies. Last night I had a nice conversation, and I observed how someone said, when my grandchildren come to me, the parents are always behind, but when they come to me, they are allowed to do everything. That's why I always order a mother and a grandmother. It is so important that the children are allowed to learn, and that things that are important to us, because we deal with them, are everyday life for the child, and that we take grandmothers with us, or grandfathers, and don't see it as a deterrent, but as a reinforcement. We now have to build a foundation for life, we have to strengthen them, we want to send them to life in a healthy way, and the generation of our children is already a little bit further. A prebiotic, for example garlic, is a prebiotic bomb. Onions, bananas, apples, all prebiotic fruits, pears, beans, those are all pulses, lentils. There are also many ballast substances that simply have a regulatory effect. I already mentioned onions, a secret tip are artichokes. I just want to say that they are responsible for it. Also oats, for example, oatmeal porridge in the morning, it has so much salicylic acid, so much silica, it really builds up, stabilizes, and so on. But I don't really want to expand on that. I just want to say that it makes so much sense. To look at your own life. And maybe just go into silence and say, what does my life look like? What does my breakfast look like on the plate? And if you know the word challenge in English, then you know that challenge means challenge. In my development to a very conscious person and people who listen to us, people who are very interested in these health topics, who are also open, who also want to change in their consciousness and in their perception. They are out of this narrow, small consciousness. They go beyond that and can better decide with consciousness, what do I buy? They decide with consciousness, what do I want to do next to my work? How do I want to make my balance? And challenge means, challenge yourself and just take a month and maybe take 5 or 6 points just in advance. And in the context of these points, they say, I eat only plant-based food for a month. I'm going to leave out everything that has an animal origin. I don't want to value the fact that tomorrow I'm going to integrate animal products again. But I only want to live plant-based for a month. I want to write a thank you diary for a month. I just write down what I was very grateful for today. I just want to try to avoid plastic for a month. That would be a very conscious, valuable, long-term, good idea. I just want to try everything that's sugar for a month. And I'm aware of that now. So that's pasta, sweets, and so on. I want to reduce that a lot. 1 month. I want to make it my goal 3 times a week to get more active somewhere than I've done before. And I might want to go back to a certain mindfulness for a month. I talked about mindfulness meditation at the beginning, or maybe in another show. That means maybe 2 or 3 times a day. Let your mind wander for 10 minutes. That would be a very nice self-optimization competition program. And this self-optimization competition program is always more to adapt. That means nothing is permanent. It's a first step. And if we go within the framework of the levels of consciousness, then you're at a very low level of consciousness. If my life is guided by fear, that's the worst thing that exists. But you get to a higher level of consciousness through courage. Courage has the level of consciousness 200. And if you have that courage and are ready to make this change, ready to be healthy for yourself, but also healthy for us, and healthy for Mother Earth, I think you've made the right start. And how much you can then strengthen your defense, that will show you the miracle of life on its own, how much your defense will benefit from it. In this sense, I would like to thank you very much for your attention in this Visite program. I'm looking forward to next week and wish you a wonderful spring. Goodbye.